Hi, it's Kevin May, the Editor-in-Chief of PhocusWire. We're here in the PhocusWire studio. Thanks for joining us. Jake Fuller, the Managing Director of Guggenheim Securities. Thank you.
Great to be here with you.
Okay. What would you say broadly is the financial health of the online travel sector at the moment?
So there's a lot going on this year. I think the two biggest themes that we've seen, number one, industry's just getting a little bit older at this point, right? The days of 20% plus growth, they're behind us. Doesn't mean growth is done though, right? So we're not going to grow at 20% anymore. I'm looking for the industry, and by the industry, I'm talking about Priceline, Booking, Trip and Trivago combined. Revenue was up 17% last year. I'm looking at 13% this year and 11% next. Great in the absolute, right? Lots of industries would love to be growing double digits, but it's not what it once was. And I think that's because it's getting older.
Does the street accept that that's just part of the cycle of the industry's growth or slowing?
The street's not quite getting it yet, right? The street's trying to figure out, is this a blip, right? Is this something like we've seen before where you have some exogenous event and growth slows down and boom, it snaps right back. Right? And I think the street's not ready doesn't know the answer yet, whether it's sort of an aging industry or whether it is something other. The reason I say I think it's aging is, I've watched over a lot of years, the OTAs and how they grow, and one of the key ingredients to growth has always been the supply side. Not well understood, but it's part of the flywheel. You add properties, you grow room nights. And I'm seeing that the property additions are slowing down, right? So if I look at a company like Booking, for example, they've grown their supply base 7, 8, 9% every quarter forever. That's slowing down. I'm looking sequentially, their supply is flattened out. And I know we're getting down into a bit of minutia, but I think that tells a story about aging.
And that's one of the reasons, and there's various reasons why they're starting to think about private accommodations, because
absolutely
the slowing down of that thing. What does the street, if we can continue calling it the street as a kind of a collective, think about that particular shift? Do they recognize that it's a tactic that Booking and Expedia and the others need to do in order to maintain some level of decent growth?
So there was a perspective early on that Airbnb was going to be a massive disruptor and a huge competitive threat to Expedia and Booking. I mean, originally people thought, and the Airbnb used to say it was a competitor to hotels. And then that switched. Now they're saying they're the competitor to OTAs, aren't they? And they are indeed, but the question is who's positioned to win in that fight, right? And I think all are pretty well positioned actually. So, obviously Airbnb is a leader in shared and private accommodation, but we've very quickly seen Booking build up its inventory more on the vacation rental side, but we've seen Expedia obviously do the same through HomeAway. Ultimately, consumer preferences are going to converge, right? Right now there are separate buckets of demand. I got someone that's a traditional hotel guest, I have someone that's a rental guest, and someone that's a private accommodation guest, but that's starting to morph, right? People are now an accommodation customer. And I think the best position to win in this fight over the long term is the one that can offer everything and surface it intelligently and show you, by learning over time what your preferences are, show you the best thing for your needs.
When you say everything, do you include flights and other things in that kind of?
I think absolutely.
Yeah.
Right, and we've certainly heard Booking talk a lot about that, how Booking.com was once a hotel-only platform, and that was their claim to fame, right? We're better because that's all we do. Over the last several years, under Glenn's leadership, we've really seen that change, right? So obviously private accommodation, but they're now integrating flights, they're integrating vacations, and soon activities.
Okay. It comes up on many of the earnings calls on a regular basis, around the volumes of money that they spend on digital marketing. We're talking about Expedia Group and Booking Holdings. I think it was 11 billion, wasn't it, last year? Apologies, I don't have the figure on me. Is there a sense, and I spoke to Glenn Fogel about this yesterday in here, is there a sense that there will be some pressure on them at some point from their investors, from the street, to really have a rethink about feeding something that is starting to bite them a little bit?
So that's a very interesting question and dynamic in the space. So the market has always preferred room nights to margin and paid a higher multiple for it. What we've seen over the last year was the opposite, right? Companies were aggressively de-escalating their spend. So if I look at Expedia and Booking combined, advertising spend was up about 20% last year. It was up 3% in the second quarter of this year, 9% in the third. So they were very clearly giving up some room nights and extracting some margin, and multiples in the space went down, right? Because I don't think the market fundamentally believed it was an aging category. If you did, that would be the right thing to do and multiples would go up.
Okay. Glenn equally said, it performs well for us, Google, and all the time it performs well for us, and we get the right margins out of it. It's easier to do that. But there is that kind of, in the tone of the way he answers the question now, it is that, but as soon as it is not, we'll think again.
Yeah.
And there's just a sharpness to that that's come over more in the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, look what we learned last year, right? The OTAs flipped a switch.
Yeah.
They went from room nights at all costs to, hey, we're going to think more about margin. And they really turned the dial down, specifically on traditional hotel meta search.
Yeah.
Right? TripAdvisor and Trivago were hit hard. One of the things I like to throw out there is, if I look at revenue growth for Trip and Trivago combined, and let's strip out TripAdvisor's non-hotel stuff, revenue was up 31% last year. It was down 11% in 2Q. It was down 26% in 3Q, right? Mm-hmm. So they've been squeezed.
Yeah.
As the OTAs have pulled back ad spend, it's come out of Trip and Trivago, who then can only respond by throttling back their own ad spend, right?
Yeah.
Because they're being squeezed. And I think what happened that led to this was a blurring of the lines between the business models, right? If you look at what Trip and Trivago were trying to do, it was own the customer, right? So they were taking a revenue dollar from Expedia and from Booking, putting it into Google and competing, to own the customer. And I think the underlying what changed was that, and it showed you Booking, hey, look, they're willing to fight back.
Is that kind of unease? Is that what triggered that period? It was on the conference last year when there was a succession of really bad couple of weeks for Expedia and Price. I mean, their stocks went down quite heavily, didn't they?
Yeah, so I think...
And is that when the nervousness kind of started?
Absolutely.
Really?
I thought Glenn on the stage last year started to signal, hey, look, we're changing something here.
Yeah.
We're shifting the way we think about advertising. And I think underlying that was all about ownership of the customer, right? We are pulling back spend, but it's on those platforms where they're starting to compete with us more directly. Mm-hmm. At the same time, we're putting more dollars onto TV, right? Because we want to build direct, we want to build brand loyalty. Funny trend that, right? Aren't most traditional businesses taking spend out of old media, putting it into Google and Facebook?
Yeah.
Almost, if you look over the last several years, a lot of consumer-facing internet companies, they're going the other way. Whether it's Yelp or Grubhub or Zillow, TripAdvisor, Trivago, Booking, they've all begun to go back towards old media.
Yeah.
A bit unclear.
And interesting because it's very difficult to measure as well. It's one of the, as compared to performance marketing. Yeah.
And that's what their DNA is all about, performance marketing. Yeah. So one of the things we've seen over the last couple of years is these companies have struggled because they don't understand and they can't measure those returns. Very few companies have actually been successful in a consumer-facing internet land at doing this well, right? TripAdvisor and Trivago hasn't worked so well.
Yeah.
Booking, we'll see.
Just we think of kind of global powerhouses of travel, and people always say it's Expedia Group and it's Booking Holdings, and increasingly they say C-Trip.
Yeah.
Does that kind of enter the thinking of analysts when they're considering about how the chess moves of this industry are being played out? Are they starting to consider that as
C-Trip as a real player in that?
Yeah, so it's a three-sided chessboard almost.
Absolutely, right.
Although Booking has made a significting investment in C-Trip anyway, which is interesting.
Yet they still compete pretty aggressively, and importantly, Booking has spread their investment around China too, right?
Yeah.
So in everybody else. So the interesting dynamic is, there was a lot of thought that C-Trip wants to be a global player. When they were on this stage a couple of years ago, they were really signaling that, right? That we're not just going to be where our travelers are going, we're also going to be local around the world, right? We want to be a local player in every market around the world.
Yep.
So the interesting question is, when we're thinking about chess moves, how do you do that, right? Are you going to go up and build organically in all of these markets? Probably not, right? So the thought at the time was, well, shoot, maybe they're going to buy something, and what's left to buy? And TripAdvisor often came up. My question is, can a Chinese company buy a U.S. company right now? That's a bit unclear to me.
For what reasons?
I mean, just the broader geopolitical
Right, it is for those,
right,
the geopolitical.
I mean, maybe that's a bit above my pay grade, but I'm thinking that's probably a pretty hard thing to get done right now.
Right, okay. Before we wrap up then, Jake, a couple of IPOs that get forever talked about. I just want to get your quick opinion on those prospective ones potentially of Airbnb and Uber. Do you sense those are going to happen?
Now, unfortunately, that's a thing I can't talk about.
Okay.
I apologize for not being able to answer, but I don't want to get myself in trouble.
Should have cleared that beforehand, but that's absolutely fine. That's no problem at all. And going back to the other three that we have been discussing, Trip, Expedia, and Booking Holdings, some M&A activity booking this year, not on the scale of perhaps it was doing in the past, but more strategic in Fair Harbour. Do you sense that tourism activities is something that they're all going to make an even bigger emphasis on? I mean, all three of them are in it now, but Trip bought Boken to kind of up its game.
It's the future for Trip, right? So
it is. But do you think Expedia could get left behind because it hasn't upped its game, or do you think it's got a big enough presence in that sector to just carry on the path it's going?
So first, I'm not convinced that tourism activities is a game changer for the big players in the space. I think it's a nice to have, not a need to have.
Yep.
And look, Expedia's got a presence there. Are they going to be the leader? Maybe, maybe not, probably not. But for TripAdvisor, it's critical for their future, right? I mean, what have we talked about here? They're being de-emphasized in the hotel search and book process, right? They've got to find a way to grow their business and leverage their massive audience. So I think it's critically important for them to be a leader and to really develop and dominate in that space. And I think Booking and Expedia will be players in that space, but it's not as critical for them.
Okay, Jake Guggenheim, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.